The carriage wheels crunched against the gravel drive of Thornfield Manor as Miss Elellanena Ashford clutched her worn leather valise, her heart hammering beneath her modest grey travelling dress. She had returned to the estate that bore her family's name, not as its rightful mistress, but as a governess hired to educate the children of the very family who had stolen everything from her. As the butler's eyes swept over her with barely concealed disdain, Eleanor lifted her chin. They didn't know. None of them knew, and when the truth finally emerged, it would shatter their world entirely. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it has traveled. Elellanena Ashford had once known what it meant to belong to a world of privilege, though that memory now felt as distant as childhood itself. Born into an old and respected family during the height of the Victorian era, she had spent her early years in the grand halls of Thornfield Manor, a sprawling estate in the English countryside, where her father had served as steward to the aging Lord Pemberton. Her mother, a woman of gentle refinement, had taught her French and watercolours in the morning room overlooking the rose gardens. But privilege, Eleanor had learned, was as fragile as morning frost. When she was barely 14, her father died suddenly, a riding accident, they said, though whispers in the servants' quarters suggested something more sinister. Within months, her mother succumbed to a fever that the local physician could not explain. Orphaned and alone, Eleanor found herself at the mercy of distant relations who viewed her as an inconvenience. The Ashford name, once spoken with respect, became a footnote in county records. What Eleanor did not know, what no one had thought to tell a grieving child, was that her father had been far more than a steward. Through a complex series of investments and a little-known codicil in Lord Pemberton's will, Thomas Ashford had become the true owner of Thornfield Manor. The elderly lord, childless and grateful for decades of loyal service, had transferred the deed to her father 5 years before his death, with the understanding that the Ashfords would maintain the estate's legacy. The documents had been filed in a London solicitor's office and promptly forgotten. Now, at 23, Eleanor had spent nearly a decade in positions of increasing desperation, first as a companion to an invalid aunt in Bath, then as a teacher at a grim boarding school in Yorkshire, where the girls were as cold as the stone walls. She had learned to make herself small, to speak only when spoken to endure the casual cruelties of those who believed themselves her betters. When the advertisement appeared in the Times, governess required for Thornfield Manor, Derbyshire, must be accomplished in music, French and deportment. References essential. Eleanor's hands had trembled as she held the newspaper. Thornfield. Her Thornfield. She had applied under her mother's maiden name, Hartley, knowing that the Ashford name might raise questions she was not yet prepared to answer. To her surprise, she received a prompt reply from the estate's new master, the Duke of Ravensmore, who had recently acquired Thornfield through what the letter vaguely described as a fortunate transaction. The Duke himself would not be in residence, the letter explained. His widowed sister, Lady Beatrice Thornbury, managed the household and would oversee Eleanor's duties, educating Lady Beatrice's 2 daughters, Arabella and Cecilia, aged 12 and 10, respectively. Eleanor had accepted immediately. She needed to see what had become of her home. She needed to understand how the Duke of Ravensmore had come to possess property that rightfully belonged to her. The journey from London had taken most of a day, and as the hired carriage finally turned onto the familiar tree-lined drive, Eleanor felt her throat constrict with emotion. Thornfield looked exactly as she remembered, the honey-coloured stone glowing in the afternoon sun, the ivy climbing the eastern wall, the fountain in the circular courtyard where she had once sailed paper boats as a child. But she was not returning as that child. She was Miss Hartley now, a woman of no consequence, arriving to serve in the house that should have been her inheritance. The butler who answered her knock was new, a severe man named Grimshaw, whose expression suggested he found her arrival deeply inconvenient. "The governess," he announced to no one in particular, his tone making it clear that governesses ranked only slightly above scullery maids in his estimation. Eleanor was shown to a small room in the servants' wing, a far cry from the spacious bedchamber she had occupied as a child. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse, but the window overlooked the gardens, and for that she was grateful. That evening she was summoned to the drawing-room to meet Lady Beatrice Thornbury. Lady Beatrice was a handsome woman in her early 40s, dressed in deep purple silk that whispered of wealth and status. Her dark hair was elaborately arranged, and diamonds glittered at her throat. She examined Eleanor with the detached interest one might show a new piece of furniture. "Miss Hartley," Lady Beatrice said, not inviting her to sit. "Your references are adequate, though I confess I had hoped for someone with more presence. My daughters require a governess who can prepare them for their eventual positions in society. Arabella will make an excellent match. We have already received interest from the Earl of Westfield's family. I trust you understand the importance of your role." "Yes, my lady," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice steady. "I will do my utmost to provide your daughters with an excellent education." Lady Beatrice's lips curved in something that was not quite a smile. "See that you do. Governesses are easily replaced, Miss Hartley. My brother, the Duke, has been generous in allowing me to manage this estate. I will not have his generosity repaid with incompetence." Eleanor felt a cold anger settle in her chest, but she merely curtsied. "Of course, my lady." As she left the drawing-room, she heard Lady Beatrice's voice drift after her. "And Miss Hartley, you will take your meals in the schoolroom. I cannot have the servants confused about your station." That night, alone in her small room, Eleanor stood at the window and looked out over the gardens she had once considered her own. Somewhere in this house, she thought, there must be records, documents, proof of her father's ownership. She had not returned merely to teach French verbs and watercolor techniques to spoiled children. She had returned to reclaim what was hers. But first, she would need to be patient. She would need to watch, to listen, to understand exactly how the Duke of Ravensmore had acquired Thornfield Manor, and she would need to be very, very careful. Because Elellanena Ashford had learned one crucial lesson in her years of hardship. Those who underestimated her always lived to regret it. Eleanor's first weeks at Thornfield were an exercise in silent endurance. Lady Beatrice's daughters, Arabella and Cecilia, were not unkind children by nature, but they had been raised to understand their superiority over those in service. Arabella, the elder, was a pretty girl, with her mother's dark colouring and a tendency toward theatrical size when asked to practice her scales. Cecilia was quieter, more observant, and Eleanor suspected she possessed a sharper intelligence than anyone gave her credit for. The schoolroom occupied the third floor, a bright space that had once been Eleanor's playroom. She recognized the window seat where she had read countless books, though it was now covered in different fabric. Each familiar detail was a small knife to her heart. Lady Beatrice rarely involved herself in the girl's education, but she made her presence felt through constant criticism. Eleanor's methods were too modern. Her accent, though impeccable, lacked the fashionable London inflection. Her posture, while correct, suggested she had not been raised in the finest circles. "One can always tell," Lady Beatrice remarked to a visiting friend within Eleanor's hearing, "when someone is merely aping their betters. Breeding will always show, or fail to show, as the case may be." Eleanor had learned to let such comments slide past her like rain off glass. She had endured worse at the Yorkshire school, where the headmistress had delighted in humiliating the staff before the students. What troubled her more was the mystery of the estate's ownership. She had managed to befriend Mrs. Dawson, the housekeeper, a kind woman who had been hired after Eleanor's departure and knew nothing of the Ashford family. Through careful questions, Eleanor learned that the Duke of Ravensmore had purchased Thornfield 5 years prior from a London investment company that had somehow acquired the property after Lord Pemberton's death. But how had the property passed from her father to this investment company? Thomas Ashford would never have sold Thornfield. He had loved this estate more than anything except his family. Eleanor began spending her free hours in the library, ostensibly to prepare lessons, but actually searching for any documents that might explain the transfer of ownership. She found nothing. Either the records had been removed, or they were kept elsewhere, perhaps in London, in the Duke's primary residence. It was during her 6th week at Thornfield that everything changed. Lady Beatrice announced that her brother, the Duke of Ravensmore, would be visiting for an extended stay. More significantly, he would be bringing with him his intended bride, Lady Charlotte Pemberton, the granddaughter of the late Lord Pemberton, recently returned from an extended tour of the continent. The household erupted into frenzied preparation. Every room was aired and polished. The gardens were manicured to perfection. Lady Beatrice ordered new gowns for herself and her daughters, and the menu for the Duke's arrival dinner was revised 3 times. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken at the name Pemberton. Charlotte Pemberton would have been a child when Eleanor left Thornfield, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. Did she remember the steward's daughter, who had occasionally played with her during her grandfather's visits? The Duke arrived on a grey afternoon in late October, his carriage magnificent, his servants numerous. Eleanor watched from the schoolroom window as he descended, a tall man in his mid-30s with auburn hair and an air of casual authority. Lady Charlotte followed, a vision in emerald travelling clothes, her blonde hair arranged in the latest fashion. That evening, Lady Beatrice commanded that the girls be presented to their uncle and his betrothed before dinner. Eleanor was to ensure they looked perfect, and then make herself scarce. She dressed Arabella and Cecilia in their finest frocks, arranged their hair, and led them downstairs to the grand drawing-room. As they reached the door, Lady Beatrice intercepted them. "The girls look acceptable," she said, barely glancing at Eleanor. "You may wait in the corridor. I'll ring when they're to be taken back upstairs." Eleanor curtsied and stepped back, but the drawing-room door remained ajar. She could hear every word spoken within. "Uncle Ravensmore," Arabella's voice bright with excitement. "How wonderful to see you. My dear nieces." The Duke's voice was warm, cultured. "How you've grown. And this must be Lady Charlotte, whom you'll soon call Aunt." "How charming." Lady Charlotte's voice was high, musical, and carried an edge of amusement. "Beatrice, you've done well with them. They'll make suitable matches when the time comes." "I have high hopes for Arabella," Lady Beatrice replied. "The Earl of Westfield's eldest son has shown considerable interest. We're planning a house party next month to encourage the connection." "Excellent," the Duke said. "And their education? You mentioned in your letter that you'd hired a new governess, Miss Hartley. Adequate, though hardly inspiring. But then, one cannot expect brilliance at the wages we pay." Eleanor's hands clenched at her sides. "Where did she come from?" Lady Charlotte asked, her tone idle. "Some dreadful school in Yorkshire. Her references were acceptable, and she was willing to accept a modest salary. That's all that matters for such a position." "Indeed," Lady Charlotte laughed. "I cannot imagine anything more tedious than being a governess. To be neither servant nor family, always on the margins. How do such women bear it?" "They bear it because they have no choice," Lady Beatrice said. "Women without family or fortune must accept whatever crumbs are offered. It's the natural order." Eleanor felt her face burn, but she remained motionless in the corridor. "Speaking of natural order," the Duke said, and his voice took on a more serious tone, "I've been reviewing the estate accounts. Thornfield is profitable, but there are some irregularities in the original purchase documents that my solicitor has flagged. Something about the previous ownership being unclear." Eleanor's breath caught. "Surely that's all resolved." Lady Beatrice sounded concerned. "You've owned Thornfield for 5 years. Yes, and the purchase was entirely legal, but there was apparently some confusion about whether the property belonged to Lord Pemberton's estate or to his steward, a man named Ashford, who died around the same time. The investment company I purchased from had acquired it through a tax sale after the steward's death. His daughter, if she still lives, would have no claim. The matter was settled in court years ago." "A tax sale?" Eleanor's mind raced. Her father had died, and somehow the property taxes had gone unpaid. The estate had been seized and sold. But why hadn't the solicitor who held the deed notified her? She had been 14, orphaned, but surely someone should have informed her. "How fortunate that you acquired it," Lady Charlotte said. "It's a lovely property, perfect for our purposes." "Indeed," the Duke agreed. "Once we're married, Charlotte, we'll divide our time between London and Thornfield. Beatrice, you and the girls will need to make other arrangements, of course. Perhaps the dower house." There was a brief, tense silence. "Of course, brother," Lady Beatrice said, her voice tight. "Whatever you think best." The conversation turned to other matters, and eventually Eleanor was summoned to collect the girls. As she entered the drawing room, she kept her eyes lowered, playing the part of the invisible servant. But as she curtsied to the Duke and Lady Charlotte, the latter looked at her with sudden, sharp interest. "Miss Hartley, is it?" Lady Charlotte said. "How curious. You look somewhat familiar. Have we met before?" Eleanor's heart hammered. "I don't believe so, my lady. I have not moved in such elevated circles." Lady Charlotte's eyes narrowed. "What is your Christian name?" "Eleanor, my lady. Eleanor Hartley." Lady Charlotte tapped her fan against her palm. "No, I suppose not. Though there was a girl I knew as a child, but she was called Ashford, the steward's daughter. She had your colouring, your features, but that girl disappeared years ago, probably dead in a workhouse somewhere." The casual cruelty of the words struck Eleanor like a physical blow. "How tragic," Lady Beatrice said without interest. "Miss Hartley, take the girls upstairs. It's past their bedtime." Eleanor curtsied again and ushered Arabella and Cecilia from the room. Her hands were shaking, her mind reeling. They thought she was dead. Or worse, they didn't think of her at all. And the Duke had purchased Thornfield legally, or so he believed. But if the original deed was still in her father's name, if the tax sale had been improper, then his ownership might not be as secure as he thought. That night, Eleanor lay awake in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. She had learned several crucial things. First, the Duke was not a villain. He had purchased the property in good faith. Second, Lady Charlotte Pemberton was exactly the sort of shallow, cruel woman who would laugh at a governess's misfortune. Third, there were irregularities in the purchase documents. And fourth, most importantly, no one knew who she really was. She had time. She had access to the house. And somewhere in London, or perhaps in the estate's own records, there must be proof of her father's ownership. Elellanena Ashford had been underestimated her entire life. It was time to use that to her advantage. The weeks following the Duke's arrival were among the most difficult Eleanor had endured. The household revolved around the betrothed couple, and Lady Beatrice's anxiety about her future displacement manifested in increasingly sharp treatment of the staff, particularly Eleanor, who bore the brunt of her mistress's frustrations. "The girl's French pronunciation is abysmal," Lady Beatrice snapped one morning, though Arabella had just delivered a flawless recitation. "If you cannot perform your duties adequately, Miss Hartley, I will have no choice but to seek a replacement." Eleanor curtsied, swallowed her anger, and returned to the schoolroom. But fate, it seemed, had not entirely abandoned her. On a cold November afternoon, a carriage arrived bearing an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Agatha Blackwood, the Duke's maternal aunt, and a woman of considerable independence and reputation. Mrs. Blackwood was a widow of 60 years, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, who had scandalized society by refusing to retire into quiet widowhood. Instead, she had traveled extensively, published essays on women's education, and maintained a salon in London where artists and intellectuals gathered regardless of their social standing. Eleanor first encountered her in the library, where she had retreated during the girls' music lesson with the visiting piano master. She was searching once again for any documents related to the estate's history when a voice startled her. "Looking for something in particular, or simply escaping the tedium of this mausoleum?" Eleanor spun to find an elegantly dressed older woman regarding her with amused interest. "Mrs. Blackwood wore a travelling suit of deep burgundy, and her silver hair was arranged in a style that was both fashionable and practical. "I beg your pardon, madam," Eleanor said, curtsying. "I'm Miss Hartley, the governess. I didn't realize anyone was here." "Clearly." Mrs. Blackwood moved closer, her eyes scanning the books Eleanor had pulled from the shelves, volumes on property law and estate management. "Unusual reading for a governess. Most of your profession prefer novels or poetry." Eleanor felt her face warm. "I find the law fascinating, madam." "Do you indeed?" Mrs. Blackwood's smile was knowing. "How refreshing. I am Agatha Blackwood, the Duke's aunt, though I suspect he wishes I were not. I have a terrible habit of speaking my mind and encouraging others to do the same. Tell me, Miss Hartley, how do you find your position here?" It was a dangerous question. Eleanor chose her words carefully. "The girls are bright and eager to learn. The estate is beautiful." A diplomatic answer that tells me nothing. Mrs. Blackwood settled into a leather chair and gestured for Eleanor to sit, a shocking breach of protocol that Eleanor hesitated to accept. "Sit, child. I cannot abide conversations where one party looms over the other. Now, I've been in this house for less than an hour, and already I can see that my niece Beatrice is making everyone miserable with her anxiety about being displaced. I suspect you bear the brunt of it." Eleanor sat, perched on the edge of a chair. "Lady Beatrice has high standards. Lady Beatrice is a fool who mistakes cruelty for authority." Mrs. Blackwood's bluntness was startling. "I knew her late husband. He was a bully and she learned from him. But you, Miss Hartley, there's something about you. You're educated beyond what one would expect. Your posture, your diction. You were not always a governess, were you?" Eleanor's heart raced. "My family fell on difficult times, madam. I was fortunate to receive an education before circumstances changed." "Circumstances." Mrs. Blackwood repeated the word as if tasting it. "A polite euphemism for tragedy, I suspect. Well, Miss Hartley, I am here for a month, and I find myself in need of a project. Would you be willing to join me for tea occasionally? I would enjoy conversing with someone who reads property law for pleasure." It was an extraordinary offer. Eleanor knew she should refuse. It would only anger Lady Beatrice, but something in Mrs. Blackwood's eyes suggested an ally, and Eleanor desperately needed one. "I would be honoured, madam." And so began an unlikely friendship. Mrs. Blackwood insisted that Eleanor join her each afternoon for tea in the small parlour that overlooked the gardens. Lady Beatrice objected, but Mrs. Blackwood overruled her with the casual authority of someone who had never doubted her own importance. "The girl has an excellent mind," Mrs. Blackwood told her nephew at dinner one evening while Eleanor was upstairs with the children. "It's being wasted on teaching scales and watercolours. She should be in London, attending lectures, engaging with ideas." The Duke, who was a fair-minded man despite his privilege, seemed intrigued. "You think highly of her." "I think highly of intelligence wherever I find it," Mrs. Blackwood replied. "And I find it appalling that women of ability are forced into positions of servitude simply because they lack fortune or family connections." Lady Charlotte, who was present, laughed. "Really, Mrs. Blackwood, you cannot expect us to treat governesses as equals. It would upset the entire social order." "The social order," Mrs. Blackwood said coolly, "is long overdue for upsetting." Indeed, during their afternoon conversations, Eleanor found herself gradually revealing more of her story, though never her true identity. She spoke of her parents' deaths, her years of hardship, her determination to maintain her dignity despite her reduced circumstances. Mrs. Blackwood listened with fierce attention. "You remind me of myself at your age," she said one afternoon. "I was fortunate to marry a man who valued my mind as much as my face. When he died, he left me independent, financially and otherwise, but I have never forgotten what it is to be powerless, to be dismissed because of one's sex or situation." "You've been very kind to me," Eleanor said quietly. "Kinder than anyone has been in years." "Kindness has nothing to do with it. I recognize quality when I see it." Mrs. Blackwood poured more tea. "Tell me, Miss Hartley, if you could choose any future for yourself, what would it be?" Eleanor hesitated. I would want to be independent, to have property of my own, a home where I belonged not as a servant, but as a mistress, to never again be at the mercy of others' whims. A modest ambition, Mrs. Blackwood said, and yet seemingly impossible given your current circumstances, unless, of course, you were to marry. I have no prospects for marriage, madam. Governesses rarely do. Perhaps not among the usual circles. But there are men of sense who value intelligence and character over dowries. Mrs. Blackwood's eyes gleamed with something Eleanor couldn't quite identify. In fact, I know several who would be quite interested in meeting a young woman of your qualities. Before Eleanor could respond, the door opened, and the Duke entered, accompanied by a man Eleanor had not seen before. Aunt Agatha, the Duke said, I hope we're not interrupting. I wanted to introduce you to Dr. James Thornton. He's recently established a practice in the village and has been kind enough to attend to some of the tenants. Dr. Thornton, my aunt, Mrs. Blackwood, and Miss Hartley, my niece's governess. Dr. Thornton was perhaps 30 years old, tall and lean, with dark hair and thoughtful grey eyes. He wore simple but well-made clothing, and there was an air of quiet competence about him. Mrs. Blackwood, he said, bowing, and Miss Hartley, I'm pleased to make your acquaintance. Doctor, Thornton has been telling me about his work in London before he came to Derbyshire, the Duke continued. He studied at Edinburgh and practiced at Guy's Hospital. We are fortunate to have him in the area. Indeed, Mrs. Blackwood said, and Eleanor caught the speculative look she directed at the doctor. Dr. Thornton, you must join us for tea. Miss Hartley and I were just discussing the importance of education and independence. I suspect you have views on the subject, Doctor. Thornton smiled, and it transformed his serious face. I do, as it happens. I believe education is the foundation of a just society, and that it should be available to all, regardless of sex or station. A radical position, Eleanor said before she could stop herself. Perhaps, Dr. Thornton replied, his eyes meeting hers with interest. But I have seen too much suffering caused by ignorance to believe otherwise. In London, I worked with several charitable organizations that provided medical care and education to the poor. It was the most meaningful work of my life. Then why leave London? Eleanor asked. My father was the physician here before me. When he died last year, I felt obligated to continue his work. These tenants and villagers deserve quality care, and I can provide it. He paused. Though I confess I miss the intellectual stimulation of the city. There are few people here interested in discussing medical advances or social reform. Then you must visit us regularly, Mrs. Blackwood declared. Miss Hartley is an excellent conversationalist, and I am always eager to debate ideas. We shall form our own salon, here in the wilds of Derbyshire. The Duke looked amused. I should warn you, Dr. Thornton, that my aunt is a formidable woman. Once she decides to befriend you, resistance is futile. I would not dream of resisting, Dr. Thornton said, and his eyes returned to Eleanor with unmistakable interest. As the men departed, Mrs. Blackwood turned to Eleanor with satisfaction. There, a man of principle, intelligence, and independent means. Not titled, of course, but far better than most of the fools who parade about in society. What did you think of him? Eleanor felt her face warm. He seems very capable. Capable? What a tepid word. Mrs. Blackwood laughed. My dear Miss Hartley, I saw how he looked at you. And more importantly, I saw how you looked at him. For the first time since I met you, you seemed genuinely interested in something beyond these walls. I cannot afford to be interested in anyone, Eleanor said quietly. I am a governess. Dr. Thornton is a gentleman. The gulf between us is unbridgeable. Nonsense. Dr. Thornton is the son of a country physician. He has worked his way up through merit, not birth. He would not care about your lack of fortune if he cared about you. Mrs. Blackwood leaned forward. And I intend to ensure he has ample opportunity to discover your qualities. Eleanor wanted to protest, but something in her heart had shifted. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope that had nothing to do with reclaiming Thornfield and everything to do with the possibility of a future she had not dared to imagine. But she could not forget why she was here. She could not allow herself to be distracted by a handsome doctor with kind eyes and radical ideas. She had a mission to complete. She had to find proof of her ownership before the Duke married Lady Charlotte, and the estate passed permanently beyond her reach. Yet as she lay in bed that night, it was not property deeds she thought of, but the way Dr. Thornton had looked at her, as if she were someone worth knowing, worth respecting. It was a dangerous feeling. And Elellanena Ashford had learned long ago that hope was the most dangerous feeling of all. December arrived with frost and fog, transforming Thornfield into a landscape of silver and shadow. The house party Lady Beatrice had planned to promote Arabella's match with the Earl of Westfield's son was scheduled for mid-month, and the household was once again consumed with preparations. Eleanor found herself caught between two worlds. By day, she was still the humble governess, enduring Lady Beatrice's criticisms and Lady Charlotte's casual cruelties. But in the afternoons, she joined Mrs. Blackwood and increasingly Dr. Thornton for conversations that ranged from medical ethics to women's suffrage to the novels of the Bronte sisters. Dr. Thornton had become a regular visitor, ostensibly to check on the health of the household, but clearly drawn by something more. He and Eleanor had fallen into an easy rapport, debating ideas with a passion that made Mrs. Blackwood smile knowingly. "You should see yourself when you talk with him," Mrs. Blackwood told Eleanor one afternoon after the doctor had departed. "You come alive. It's as if you've been holding your breath for years and finally remembered how to breathe." Eleanor knew it was true. In Dr. Thornton's presence, she felt like herself again, not the diminished, careful creature she had become, but the girl who had once believed the world was full of possibilities. But she also knew it was dangerous. She was living a lie, hiding her true identity, and when the truth emerged, as it must, everything would change. Her search for documentation had yielded frustratingly little. The estate's records were meticulously kept, but they began only with the Duke's purchase 5 years prior. Anything earlier had apparently been archived or removed. Eleanor knew she would need to travel to London to find the solicitor who had held her father's papers. But how could a governess possibly arrange such a journey? The answer came from an unexpected source. One evening, as Eleanor was preparing the girls for bed, Cecilia, the younger and more observant daughter, looked up at her with serious eyes. "Miss Hartley, may I ask you something?" "Of course, Cecilia." "Are you unhappy here?" Eleanor was startled. "What makes you ask that? You always look sad when you think no one is watching, and Mama is cruel to you." "I've noticed." Cecilia's voice was small, but determined. "I think you're the best governess we've ever had. I wish Mama could see it." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "That's very kind of you, Cecilia. I'm not unhappy. Teaching you and your sister is a privilege." "But you deserve better," Cecilia insisted. "You're clever and kind, and you should be, I don't know, something more than a governess." "We don't always get what we deserve," Eleanor said gently, "but we can choose to make the best of what we have." It was a lesson she had learned through bitter experience, but even as she spoke the words, she wondered if she truly believed them anymore. The house party began on a Friday evening with a grand dinner. Eleanor was not invited, of course, but she watched from the schoolroom window as carriages arrived, bearing the Earl of Westfield's family and other local gentry. The house blazed with light, and music drifted up from the ballroom. She was preparing for bed when Mrs. Blackwood appeared at her door, resplendent in midnight blue silk. "Miss Hartley, I need your assistance. My maid has taken ill, and I require help with my jewellery. Would you mind?" It was a transparent excuse. Mrs. Blackwood was perfectly capable of managing her own jewellery, but Eleanor followed her to the guest suite. Once inside, Mrs. Blackwood closed the door and turned to her with a conspiratorial smile. "I have a proposition for you. The dancing will begin shortly, and I want you to attend." Eleanor stared at her. I cannot possibly. You can, and you will. I've brought a gown that should fit you. We're of a similar height, though you're slimmer. You'll wear it, come downstairs as my companion, and you'll dance. No one will dare question my guest. Lady Beatrice will be furious. Lady Beatrice can go hang. You have been buried in this house for months, treated as if you're invisible. Tonight you will be seen, you will be yourself, intelligent, accomplished, beautiful. And if a certain doctor happens to be in attendance, well, that's merely fortunate timing. Eleanor wanted to refuse. It was reckless, foolish, and would only cause trouble. But something in her rebelled against the careful, diminished existence she had been living. Very well, she heard herself say. The gown was a deep sapphire blue, elegant and fashionable without being ostentatious. Mrs. Blackwood's maid, who had miraculously recovered, arranged Eleanor's hair in a style that emphasized her fine features. When Eleanor looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. "There, Mrs." Blackwood said with satisfaction. "Now you look like the woman you were meant to be." They descended the stairs together, and Eleanor felt every eye turned toward them. Lady Beatrice's face went white with shock, then red with fury. Lady Charlotte's expression was one of disbelief, but the Duke merely looked curious, and Dr. Thornton, standing near the ballroom entrance, looked stunned. "Aunt Agatha," the Duke said, approaching them. "What a surprise! And Miss Hartley, I hardly recognized you. You look quite transformed." "Miss Hartley is my companion for the evening," Mrs. Blackwood announced. "I hope you don't mind, Ravensmore. I find these events tedious without someone intelligent to talk to." Before the Duke could respond, Lady Beatrice descended on them like a fury. "This is outrageous. Miss Hartley is a governess. She cannot attend a ball as if she were a guest." "She is my guest," Mrs. Blackwood said coolly. "And unless you wish to insult me, Beatrice, you will accept it graciously." The Duke, to his credit, intervened. "It's quite all right, Beatrice. Aunt Agatha may invite whom she pleases. Miss Hartley, I hope you enjoy the evening." Lady Beatrice looked as if she might explode, but she could not contradict the Duke in front of guests. She settled for a look of pure venom directed at Eleanor before sweeping away. Dr. Thornton approached, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. "Miss Hartley, may I have the honor of the first dance?" Eleanor's heart raced. "I'm not certain that would be appropriate, Dr. Thornton." "I'm not certain I care about appropriate," he replied, offering his hand. She took it. The waltz was a revelation. Eleanor had not danced in years, but her body remembered the steps, and Dr. Thornton was an excellent partner. As they moved across the floor, she was acutely aware of the whispers, the stares, the shock on Lady Charlotte's face. "You're causing quite a scandal," Dr. Thornton murmured. "I didn't intend to." "I think you did, and I think it's magnificent." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "You've been hiding yourself, Miss Hartley." "Why?" "Because women in my position must be invisible to survive." "But you're not surviving. You're merely existing." His grey eyes were intense. "You deserve so much more than this." The dance ended, but Dr. Thornton did not release her hand immediately. "Walk with me in the conservatory. I have something I wish to discuss with you." Eleanor knew she should refuse. This was already too much, too dangerous, but she nodded. The conservatory was warm and fragrant with exotic plants. Dr. Thornton led her to a bench near a fountain, and for a moment they sat in silence. "I have been thinking about you constantly since we met," he said finally. "I know I should not speak so plainly, but I find I cannot help myself. You are unlike any woman I have ever known. Your intelligence, your strength, your grace, despite the circumstances you've endured. I am in awe of you." Eleanor's breath caught. "Dr. Thornton, James. Please call me James." "James, you don't know me." "Not really. There are things about me, about my past. I know enough. I know that you are kind to children who are not always kind to you. I know that you read property law for pleasure and debate social reform with passion. I know that you have been treated abominably by people who should recognize your worth." He took her hand. "I know that I would very much like to know you better. Much better." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I am a governess with no fortune and no family. You're a gentleman, a physician. There can be no future for us. There can be if we choose it. I don't care about fortune or family. I care about character, about compatibility, about building a life with someone I respect and admire. He paused. Eleanor. May I call you Eleanor? She nodded, unable to speak. Eleanor, I am not proposing marriage after such a short acquaintance, but I am proposing that we allow ourselves the possibility of it, that we continue to know each other, to see if what I feel, and what I hope you feel, might grow into something lasting. I do feel something, Eleanor whispered, but I'm frightened. I've lost everything before. I cannot bear to lose again. Then we will be careful. We will take our time, but please don't deny us both the chance at happiness because you're afraid. Before Eleanor could respond, the conservatory door burst open. Lady Charlotte stood there, her face twisted with malice, and behind her was Lady Beatrice and several guests. I knew it, Lady Charlotte exclaimed. The governess has been scheming to entrap Dr. Thornton. How perfectly predictable. Eleanor stood, her face burning. We were merely talking, alone, in a dark conservatory. How convenient! Lady Charlotte's voice dripped with false sympathy. Really, Dr. Thornton, you must be more careful. Women of her class will use any means necessary to improve their station. James stood as well, his expression cold. Lady Charlotte, you will apologize to Miss Hartley immediately. I will do no such thing. I am merely protecting you from an obvious fortune hunter. The only thing obvious here is your cruelty and your jealousy. James's voice was steel. Miss Hartley has more integrity in her smallest finger than you possess in your entire being. And if you cannot see that, then you are as foolish as you are mean-spirited. Lady Charlotte gasped. Lady Beatrice looked triumphant. This scandal would surely result in Eleanor's dismissal. But then Mrs. Blackwood pushed through the crowd. Enough! Lady Charlotte, you have made a spectacle of yourself. Dr. Thornton and Miss Hartley have done nothing wrong. If you cannot behave with basic decency, perhaps you should retire for the evening. The Duke appeared behind his aunt, his expression troubled. Charlotte, I think perhaps Mrs. Blackwood is right. This has gotten out of hand. Lady Charlotte's face went pale. You're taking their side, against me? I'm taking the side of reason and civility. Miss Hartley is a guest of my aunt's. She has been treated abominably, and I will not have it continue under my roof. It was a public rebuke, and Lady Charlotte knew it. She drew herself up with wounded dignity. I see. Then perhaps I should reconsider whether I wish to remain in a house where governesses are elevated above their betters. Perhaps you should, the Duke said quietly. The crowd dispersed, buzzing with gossip. Eleanor stood frozen, aware that her position at Thornfield was now untenable. She had been publicly humiliated, and even the Duke's intervention could not erase that. Mrs. Blackwood took her arm. Come, my dear, let's get you upstairs. But as they left the conservatory, James caught Eleanor's hand. This changes nothing between us, he said urgently. Do you understand? Nothing. Eleanor nodded, but she knew he was wrong. Everything had changed, and she could not see how any of it could end well. The morning after the ball, Eleanor expected to be summoned and dismissed. Instead, she received a note from the Duke requesting her presence in the library. She went with trepidation, expecting the worst, but when she entered, she found not just the Duke, but Mrs. Blackwood, and surprisingly, a distinguished older gentleman she did not recognize. Miss Hartley, the Duke said, gesturing for her to sit. Thank you for coming. This is Mr. Pembroke, my solicitor from London. He has brought some information that I believe will interest you. Eleanor sat, her heart pounding. Mr. Pembroke opened a leather case and withdrew several documents. Your Grace asked me to investigate the irregularities in the Thornfield purchase that you mentioned. In doing so, I discovered something quite extraordinary. He looked at Eleanor. Miss Hartley, what was your father's name? Eleanor's mouth went dry. Thomas Ashford. And your mother's maiden name? Hartley. Mr. Pembroke nodded, as if this confirmed something. I thought as much. Your Grace, it appears that Miss Hartley is not merely a governess. She is, in fact, the legal owner of Thornfield Manor. The room went silent. That's impossible, the Duke said finally. I purchased Thornfield 5 years ago. You purchased it from an investment company that had acquired it through a tax sale, but that sale was fraudulent. Thomas Ashford had indeed been deeded the property by Lord Pemberton, with all taxes paid in perpetuity through a trust. When Ashford died, the trust should have passed to his daughter, Miss Hartley. Instead, a corrupt solicitor who managed the trust embezzled the funds and allowed the property to go to tax sale, pocketing the proceeds. How did you discover this? Mrs. Blackwood asked. When His Grace asked me to investigate, I found the original deed and trust documents in the archives. The solicitor in question, a man named Grimsby, has since died, but his crimes are well documented. Miss Hartley is the rightful owner of Thornfield Manor. She has been for the past 9 years. Eleanor could not breathe. But I had no idea. No one told me, because Grimsby ensured you wouldn't know. He likely assumed you would die in poverty, and the matter would never come to light. Mr. Pembroke's voice was gentle. I am deeply sorry for what you have endured, Miss Hartley, but the law is clear. Thornfield is yours. The Duke stood and walked to the window, his back to the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. Then I have been living in another woman's home, treating her as a servant, while she was the rightful owner all along. You didn't know, Eleanor said quickly. You purchased the property in good faith. That doesn't excuse it. He turned to face her. Miss Hartley, Miss Ashford, I owe you an enormous apology. And more than that, I owe you restitution. Thornfield is yours. I will vacate immediately. Your Grace, Mr. Pembroke interjected, there is the matter of the purchase price you paid, and the improvements you've made to the estate. These are not insignificant sums. I don't care about the money, the Duke said. This is a matter of justice. Eleanor's mind was reeling. Thornfield was hers. After all these years, after all the suffering, it was finally legally hers. But as she looked at the Duke's stricken face, she felt no triumph, only a strange sadness. Your Grace, she said slowly, you have been a fair and honourable landlord. The tenants speak well of you. The estate has prospered under your management. I have no wish to displace you or your family. But it's your property. Then perhaps we can come to an arrangement. Eleanor looked at Mr. Pembroke. Is it possible for the Duke to purchase the estate from me properly this time, for a fair price that reflects its value? Mr. Pembroke looked surprised, but pleased. Certainly, that would be the most equitable solution. Then that is what I propose. You will purchase Thornfield from me, Your Grace, and I will finally have the independence I've always wanted. The Duke studied her for a long moment. You are remarkably generous, Miss Ashford. More generous than I deserve, but I accept your proposal. Mr. Pembroke will draw up the papers, and you will receive a sum that will ensure your comfort for life. Mrs. Blackwood had been uncharacteristically quiet, but now she spoke. Eleanor, where will you go? What will you do? It was a good question. Eleanor had spent so long focused on reclaiming Thornfield that she had not thought beyond it. But now, with freedom and fortune within her grasp, the possibilities seemed endless. I don't know, she admitted, but I have time to decide. You could stay here, the Duke offered, not as a governess, but as a guest, until you determine your future. Eleanor shook her head. Thank you, but no. I think it's time I left Thornfield. There are too many painful memories here. Then come to London with me, Mrs. Blackwood said. Stay in my house, meet people, see the world beyond these walls. You've been buried alive for too long, my dear. It's time you lived. Before Eleanor could respond, there was a commotion in the hallway. The door burst open, and Lady Charlotte swept in, followed by a flustered Lady Beatrice. Ravensmore, I must speak with you immediately, Lady Charlotte announced. I have decided to forgive last night's unfortunate incident, and I think we should move forward with announcing our engagement. She stopped, seeing the assembled group. What is this? Why is the governess here? Miss Ashford, the Duke said quietly, is here because this is her house. She is the legal owner of Thornfield Manor. Lady Charlotte's face went through a remarkable series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally, fury. That's absurd. She's a governess. She was a governess because she was cheated out of her inheritance, Mrs. Blackwood said. But that has now been rectified. Eleanor is a woman of property and fortune. Unlike some people in this room, she has earned her position through suffering and grace. Lady Beatrice had gone pale. This cannot be true. If she owned Thornfield, why would she have come here as a governess? Because I didn't know, Eleanor said, finding her voice. I came here to find proof of my father's ownership. I never imagined I would actually discover it. Lady Charlotte turned to the Duke. You cannot seriously be considering giving her the estate. We were going to live here after our marriage. There will be no marriage, the Duke said, and his voice was final. Charlotte, I have been blind to your true character. Last night's cruelty to Miss Ashford was inexcusable. I cannot marry a woman who treats others with such contempt. You're ending our engagement. Over a governess? I'm ending our engagement because you have shown me that we are fundamentally incompatible. You value status and appearance above character and kindness. I cannot build a life with someone who does not share my values. Lady Charlotte's face contorted with rage. You will regret this. My family will not forget this insult. Then they will have to live with their displeasure, the Duke said calmly. Mr. Pembroke, please show Lady Charlotte out. Lady Beatrice, I think you and the girls should begin making arrangements to move to the Dower House. It will be more appropriate once the estate changes hands. As Lady Charlotte was escorted from the room, still protesting, Lady Beatrice turned to Eleanor with something like desperation. Miss Ashford, surely you won't turn us out. The girls are welcome to remain until the end of the school term, Eleanor said, and you may take as long as you need to make suitable arrangements. I am not a cruel person, Lady Beatrice, though you have given me every reason to be. Lady Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, whether of shame or relief, Eleanor could not tell. She curtsied and fled. When they were alone again, Mrs. Blackwood embraced Eleanor. You handled that with remarkable grace. I'm proud of you. I feel as if I'm in a dream, Eleanor admitted. This morning, I was a governess. Now I'm a woman of property. It doesn't seem real. It's real, the Duke said, and you deserve every bit of it. Miss Ashford, I hope you will allow me to make amends for the way you were treated in this house. You didn't know who I was, and you defended me last night when you could have sided with Lady Charlotte. That speaks to your character, Your Grace. There was a knock at the door, and James entered. He stopped when he saw the assembled group. I apologize for interrupting. I heard there was some commotion. His eyes found Eleanor. Are you all right? I'm more than all right, Eleanor said, and she felt a smile break across her face. James, I have the most extraordinary news. As she explained the situation, she watched his expression shift from confusion to amazement to joy. When she finished, he crossed the room and took her hands. Then you're free, he said. Truly free. I am. And you're going to London with Mrs. Blackwood? For a time, I need to discover who I am when I'm not defined by loss and servitude. James nodded, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. I understand. You deserve that time. But Eleanor, when you're ready, if you're ready, I will be here. My feelings haven't changed. Nor have mine, Eleanor said softly. But I need to find myself before I can give myself to anyone else. Then I will wait, James said, however long it takes. Mrs. Blackwood cleared her throat. Well, this is all very romantic, but we have practical matters to attend to. Eleanor, we should begin planning your departure. You'll need a new wardrobe, for one thing. You cannot arrive in London dressed as a governess. Eleanor laughed, and it felt like the first genuine laugh she had experienced in years. No, I suppose I cannot. As they made plans, Eleanor felt the weight of the past finally lifting from her shoulders. She had come to Thornfield seeking justice and had found it. But more than that, she had found friendship, respect, and the possibility of love. She had been underestimated, dismissed and humiliated, but she had endured. And now, finally, she was free to choose her own path. The future stretched before her, full of possibility. And for the first time in 9 years, Elellanena Ashford was not afraid. 6 months had passed since Eleanor left Thornfield, and London had transformed her in ways she could never have imagined. Mrs. Blackwood's house in Mayfair had become her sanctuary, a place where she was valued not for her birth or fortune, but for her mind and spirit. The sale of Thornfield had been completed with remarkable efficiency. The Duke had paid a generous sum, more than fair market value, Eleanor suspected, though Mr. Pembroke assured her it was appropriate. With that fortune, Eleanor had purchased a modest but elegant townhouse in Bloomsbury, a neighbourhood known for its intellectual atmosphere and relative freedom from rigid social conventions. She had also, at Mrs. Blackwood's urging, begun attending lectures at the newly established London School of Medicine for Women. She had no intention of becoming a physician herself, but the lectures on public health and social medicine fascinated her. She had seen too much poverty and suffering to remain ignorant of the forces that shaped people's lives. Through Mrs. Blackwood's salon, Eleanor had met writers, artists, reformers, and thinkers. She had discovered a world where women could speak their minds, where intelligence was celebrated rather than hidden, where one's past mattered less than one's ideas. She had also maintained a regular correspondence with James. His letters were thoughtful, passionate, and patient. He wrote of his work in Derbyshire, of the tenants he treated, of the small victories and large frustrations of rural medicine. He never pressed her for more than she was willing to give, but his affection was evident in every line. And slowly, carefully, Eleanor had begun to believe that she might deserve happiness after all. It was a warm June evening when James arrived in London. He had written to say he was coming, that he had matters to attend to in the city, and Eleanor had invited him to dinner at her new home. She had spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation, supervising the cook, arranging flowers, changing her dress 3 times. Mrs. Blackwood, who had stopped by to offer moral support, had laughed at her anxiety. "You're in love with him," Mrs. Blackwood said. "Stop fighting it." "I'm not fighting it. I'm simply cautious. Caution is wise. Terror is not. And my dear, you look terrified." Eleanor had to admit she was right, but when James arrived, looking handsome and slightly travel-worn, her fear evaporated. He was simply James, steady, kind, intelligent James, who looked at her as if she were the most remarkable woman in the world. They dined in her small but elegant dining room, talking of everything and nothing. James told her about a difficult childbirth he had attended, where both mother and baby had survived against the odds. Eleanor told him about a lecture she had attended on sanitation reform, and how it had inspired her to fund a clean water project in one of London's poorest neighbourhoods. "You're doing remarkable work," James said. "I'm in awe of you. I'm simply using my resources to help others. It's what anyone with means should do. But most don't. Most people of fortune use their wealth to insulate themselves from suffering, not to alleviate it." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Eleanor, I came to London for a reason. I've been offered a position at Guy's Hospital, my old teaching hospital. They want me to establish a clinic for the poor, a place where people can receive quality medical care regardless of their ability to pay." Eleanor's heart leapt. "James, that's wonderful. You'll accept, won't you?" "That depends on you." She stared at him. "On me? I don't want to leave Derbyshire if it means leaving you, but if you'll have me, if you'll marry me, then I'll move to London. We can work together, you on your sanitation projects, me at the clinic. We can build a life of purpose and meaning together." Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. "You would give up your practice in Derbyshire for me?" "I would give up anything for you, but I'm not giving up anything. I'm gaining everything. Eleanor, I love you. I have loved you since the moment I saw you in that library, holding yourself with such dignity despite the way you were being treated." I love your intelligence, your compassion, your strength. I love who you are and who you're becoming. Please say you'll marry me." Eleanor stood, and James rose with her. She took his face in her hands and looked into his eyes. "I love you too. I have been so afraid to admit it, so afraid to hope. But yes, James, yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, and it was everything she had dreamed of, tender and passionate and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and laughing, Eleanor said, "We should tell Mrs. Blackwood. She'll be insufferable with her 'I told you so.'" Let her be insufferable. She was right. James pulled Eleanor close again. "We'll be married soon. I don't want to wait." "Neither do I. A small ceremony, just close friends. I've had enough of grand society events." "Perfect. And then we'll begin our life together, our real life, the one we choose." They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at Mrs. Blackwood's house. The Duke of Ravensmore attended, having become a genuine friend to Eleanor in the months since the revelation of her identity. Arabella and Cecilia were there as well, the girls having formed a real affection for their former governess. Lady Beatrice had sent a stiff note of congratulation, but did not attend. Lady Charlotte, Eleanor heard, had married a wealthy but elderly baron and was reportedly miserable. Eleanor felt no satisfaction in Charlotte's unhappiness, only a distant pity. She had learned that revenge was hollow, but living well, truly well, with purpose and love, was the greatest triumph of all. After the wedding, Eleanor and James moved into her Bloomsbury townhouse. James took up his position at Guy's Hospital, and his clinic for the poor quickly became known as one of the finest in London. Eleanor continued her charitable work, focusing particularly on education and healthcare for women and children. They were not wealthy by aristocratic standards, but they were comfortable, respected, and deeply happy. One afternoon, nearly a year after their marriage, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor. The butler announced the Duke of Ravensmore, and Eleanor welcomed him into her drawing room with genuine pleasure. "Your Grace, what a lovely surprise. James is at the hospital, but he should return soon. Will you stay for tea?" "I would be delighted." The Duke settled into a chair and accepted a cup. "I wanted to update you on Thornfield. The estate continues to prosper, and I've implemented several of the improvements you suggested. Better housing for the tenants, a school for the village children." "I'm so glad. Thornfield deserves a good steward." "It does. And it had one. In your father. I've had a plaque installed in the estate chapel, honouring Thomas Ashford's service and legacy. I thought you should know." Eleanor felt her eyes sting with tears. "Thank you. That means more than you know. It's the least I could do." The Duke paused. "Eleanor, I also wanted to tell you that I'm engaged to be married to a woman very different from Lady Charlotte, a widow with 3 children, intelligent and kind. Someone who values character over status." "I'm so happy for you," Eleanor said sincerely. "You deserve that. As do you, and you've found it." The Duke smiled. "When I think of how you came to Thornfield as a governess, how you endured such treatment with such grace, and how you emerged from it all with your integrity intact, I'm humbled. You could have been bitter, vengeful. Instead, you were generous. You taught me something about true nobility, Eleanor. It has nothing to do with titles or birth. It's about how we treat others, especially when we have power over them." After the Duke left, Eleanor stood at the window, looking out at the bustling London street. She thought of the frightened girl who had arrived at Thornfield 6 months ago, desperate and alone. That girl had been so focused on reclaiming her past that she had nearly missed the possibility of a future. But she had learned something crucial. Home was not a place, not a building or an estate. Home was where you were valued, where you were loved, where you could be fully yourself. She had found that home with James, with Mrs. Blackwood, with the work they were building together. When James returned that evening, tired but satisfied with the day's work, Eleanor met him at the door. He pulled her into his arms, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Good day?" he asked. "Perfect day," she replied. The Duke visited. Thornfield is thriving. Do you ever regret selling it? Eleanor considered the question. No. Thornfield was my father's dream, not mine. My dream is this, a life of purpose, a partnership of equals, the freedom to make a difference in the world. I have everything I ever truly wanted. As do I, James said, kissing the top of her head. As do I. That night, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked different from the pale, careful governess who had arrived at Thornfield. There was colour in her cheeks, light in her eyes, confidence in her bearing. She had been tested by loss, by injustice, by cruelty, but she had not been broken. She had endured, adapted, and ultimately triumphed, not through revenge or bitterness, but through grace, intelligence, and the courage to hope. The family had laughed at the humble governess the Duke hired, not knowing she was the owner of their estate, but more importantly, they had not known who she truly was, a woman of strength, compassion, and remarkable resilience. And now, finally, Elellanena Ashford knew it too. She was not defined by what had been taken from her, but by what she had built from the ruins. She was not a victim of circumstance, but an architect of her own destiny. She had bloomed where she was planted, and the garden she had cultivated was more beautiful than she had ever dared to imagine. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me which part of the world you're listening from and what you thought of Eleanor's journey. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more stories with you soon.